Hello, everybody!
Turn us up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. It's good to hear the old catchphrase from you. Hello, 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 everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, the return, finally, we have Dylan. Welcome back, Dylan. We missed you.
Yeah, I missed being on the pod. I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles. I want to just say hi. I'm okay, everyone. I'm alive. I'm here. I appreciate you calling for backup from... I feel like you called for backup from probably the two most likely sources over there with your mom and Derek. It's like the people you would have called for backup from since way back in the good old days.
That's true.
And for the record, I heard you and Derek speculating on whether or not I would be listening, and I did listen to the episodes.
Good.
Okay.
I was gonna say, I was wondering if you heard, because I was like, I don't know many more people after this.
Yes,
I've got my mom
so
and the other member of the M crew, and that's about it.
Right. Yeah. No. Those are awesome episodes. I was like really enjoying. I got some good tips from your mom as to what kind of books to really check out with trying to get you to cry with that mission Make Charles Cry, Don't Worry Me, and the Fong of Emberlane. We have not forgotten about that.
Right.
And then, you listen to you and Derek chat Star Wars. I mean, classic Roger.
As we do.
It was basically a Roger pod takeover.
It basically was, yeah, but... We're excited to have you back. This will be, we had a re-release Friday, and then now this will be Monday that you will have returned, and we're very happy for that, because I could not record this with anybody else, because today is the day. We had promised this for a while, and we are finally delivering. It is my pleasure to say that we will be discussing Red Country, the third standalone novel in the First Law universe, written by the one, the only Joe Abercrombie. We're here today.
Yeah, we're actually doing it.
We're finally doing it.
Talking about Red Country with you, Charles, has felt like a preposterously long time coming. And this is interestingly my favorite of the three standalones, which puts me in
a minority.
This puts, very clear minority. We ran a poll on Twitter, and it was basically a tie between, which is your favorite of the three Joe Abercrombie standalones. It was a tie between Best Served Cold and The Heroes, and then it was like 9% of the vote or something.
Very small. Yeah, and I really enjoyed this book, for the record, but I kind of am siding with the general populace on this one. It's like 50-50 between Best Served Cold and The Heroes, and then this is an obvious rung underneath. But that's not to say that it wasn't good, and I'm like, this has been a long time. We have never talked about this book together before, so we're finally getting to share our ideas on this one. That's very exciting. But before we do that, we have a few spoiler warning things to do, right, Dylan?
Yes. So we're going to be discussing Joe Abercrombie's First Law universe up through Red Country, which means that this will be no holds barred for that series up to that point. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't read the original First Law Trilogy, or haven't read the two standalones leading up to this, that's Best Served Cold,
all the standalones,
and The Heroes. Yes, all the standalones. Yeah, that's true. If you haven't read all of the standalones and the original First Law Trilogy, then we won't be holding back on spoilers for those. So if you don't want to hear that, then might be a good time to turn this down in your headphones and pick up those books that you haven't read yet, because it's Joe Abercrombie. fans. It's Joe
It's
Abercrombie. So we
sure.
have to say, you gotta check those out. That's if we can endorse anything, it's going to be Joe Abercrombie and his books. So highly recommend all of those. And for those of you who are still sticking around, it's time to get into some incredible Joe Abercrombie goodness in Red Country.
Yes, we do. And we can't really get into it without me sharing my reaction right off the top that we have the return of Logan Nine Fingers. I kind of knew this was coming. This was not like a huge secret for me, but yeah, they tease it by introducing Lamb, and when they introduced Lamb, I had no idea that this was Logan. But very early on, he says one of his isms, and I knew right instantly from there. But and to me, it was just so fun. I was like, oh boy, he didn't actually like drown and get washed away in that river at the end of Last Argument of Kings. Everyone's been kind of referring to him throughout these standalones, and he's kind of like a myth at this point. Some people aren't sure if he's dead. Some people are convinced he's dead. And then here he is living a peaceful life out in the country under the pseudonym of Lamb for now at the beginning of this book. And the only other thing I want to say before we get into the plot while we're talking about Lamb is that I admire Abercrombie's commitment to not acknowledging the name Logan at all. Like he goes as far as he possibly can to say this is Logan. Besides straight up saying this is Logan, he hits all the isms. He mentions the Nine Fingers. He has other characters reacting to him, being like, "I know who you are." Shivers comes and makes an appearance at the end, which was great. And they had all these moments, but he's committed to living in the perspective of these new characters, and these new characters do not know his name, and Lamb is not going to say it. And that's one of the things that I thought was just super fascinating about this book. And when we do eventually do our discussion on like Abercrombie and the power of the POV, this is such a huge part of it. It's just the commitment to this story while also building off of all these books before that built up Logan as the main character, and now he's off to the side and we're getting him in a totally different perspective. And that to me was one of the most rewarding things of reading this book.
Well said, Charles. Yeah, I'll say that Abercrombie, as a rule from what I've been able to see, does not repeat point of views across books. Or let me rephrase that. He doesn't repeat point of views across separate entities, meaning that, of course, he does in the original trilogy repeat throughout the three books, and then he repeats in Age of Madness.
So the trilogies has got POVs, and then in Best Served Cold, and then The Heroes, and now Red Country. Those three books in that trilogy don't repeat POVs.
Yeah. Once a series or a standalone book has used a point of view character as a point of view character, that character will never have, to this point, will never have a point of view in a later book, is I guess what I'm saying, or a later series, or it's hard to say it with the standalones, but I'm hoping folks are getting what I mean. Like, once a point of view has been used in the series.
And everyone that's read up to this point is probably realizing this. Like, it's true. We only got Shivers once. We only got Casca once. We never get Lamb because he's from the original. He's an original character POV. So all of these things, it leads to a really. And Abercrombie loved to do this. Even the original trilogy was to describe people both in their heads and outside using other people's POVs, and he was like telling jokes that way. He was having fun that way, and he was also developing character that way in a really fascinating way. And Dylan, we had a whole an episode committed to talking about Logan Nine Fingers as a character, and I feel like a lot of what we were kind of circling around towards the end is being almost highlighted here, and his whole theme of how good of a guy was he really, how much is he really a reluctant, violent person, and how much is he like embracing and seeking this violence for himself. And it's like, after us having that conversation, I was super fascinated to see where Lamb went in the story.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Charles. There's on my book cover, this part of why I was like, "Ooh, Charles, you didn't know it was coming or whatever," because I don't know. Did you audiobook with Stephen Pacey?
I did, but I did, a
Yeah.
long time ago. I saw the cover for Red Country, and I counted the fingers.
That's where I was going exactly. There's a guy holding a sword and there's a distinct missing finger, and this is Joe Abercrombie. And Charles, you're a bright man over there. I knew you could connect those dots, but I was thinking maybe you just hadn't seen the cover. So
the cover of the audiobook is like a square version of the cover that's popular as like when it showed, like these standalones have different characters, like a really close up where it doesn't show their eyes usually, but it shows their like mouth and face and arms and hands and stuff. So I knew he wasn't gone just because I've absorbed, like, I guess you'd call them spoilers or whatever. It didn't really spoil the reading experience for me, but I knew he was coming back. And I was like, I wonder where. And then, of course, Lamb, within the first couple chapters, drops an ism. And I was like, oh, Lamb is Logan. I got it. So that was fun for me to have that realization. And props to Abercrombie for keeping it close. But he's not a main character in this. The main character, I would say, one of them is Shy South. And Lamb is like her stepfather. And then she has two kids, Ro and Pitt. And it's when Ro and Pitt get abducted and carried away that kicks off this adventure, and it helps establish like the time and place in Abercrombie's world. We've gotten the sense just from the heroes and even from like the end of the First Law Trilogy that this world was changing, that magic was leaving the world, and technology was coming in, and we got to test cannons last time. But this is like a really distinct jump forward in time, and now we're in this like Western gold rush era kind of setting, and it's a bold move to change your world irreparably into something totally new, and to tell a standalone story, like really bold. And I don't know, I thought it was fun.
Yeah, no, I love how Abercrombie's world evolves, how you get to see how characters are influenced by prior generations of characters, which is something that we really get to see here, where it's like Shy, she's a complicated character, and we'll get into it more throughout this, but something that I really like to see is how someone who was basically raised by Logan Nine Fingers, in the way that Logan kind of tried to have his influence on Jazal, but Jazal was pretty deep in his his own narcissism, his own story. I think Logan did help Jazal grow, but that being said, he had a lot further to dig out of the hole of narcissism that Jazal was stuck in. Shy, from a much younger age, got to hear a lot of Logan's wisdoms and his axioms and all these things, and you get to see how someone like Shy might be able to grow into a person who can actually do good things and potentially live a fulfilling life, even in this really messed up world, by trying to pick and choose and understand what lessons Logan actually has to teach her and what things are actually super helpful. And even if Logan can't always learn himself from those lessons, you get to see this, like, okay, this early generation of characters from Abercrombie's world has Logan, and he actually does have things to teach us. I feel like he's taught me things personally. I've said since one of our early episodes, that's like, I just think, as I'm going about my life, I often think, like, once you've got a task to do, better do it than live with the fear of it. And that's good advice. But it's like, what happens when these past generations can impact our
but it's interesting. Shy,
our new characters, is awesome.
It's true. But then you consider, like, Shy's opinion of Lamb is not that great. She calls him a coward,
some kind of coward.
And is convinced that he's like a bit slow too. And she's like, this guy, like, good thing he has me to take care of him because he's hopeless. Which is kind of funny to think of Lamb that way. And we know Lamb is willing to, he's seen it all, and to him this is like as good as life gets, is to be kind of this more humble character. And it's interesting to see him like fully embody that at the beginning of the story. Like, he's obviously raised these kids and worked on this farm for a long time, and all these people, all these characters know Shy, Ro, and Pitt know is Lamb. They don't know Logan or Life Before, like from the original trilogy. And it's interesting to see Lamb committing to this advice that he always used to give that no one was able to seem to follow in the First Law, which is like, look, just find a nice place, settle down, avoid violence, forget what good is power and scores and strength and all these things. Like, it just gets you into trouble. And he's lived that committedly until now, this point when Ro and Pitt are abducted, and you see all that start to kind of crumble throughout this book slowly but surely until we get to all these crazy action pieces at the end and all this. But it's fun to see him start off in this way, committed to this life that he had always been preaching. And it's, can he hold it or not? Is this his true nature or not, that we come to find out throughout the story?
That's so well said, Charles. Yeah, that's kind of Logan's journey, I would say, throughout this book is... Yeah, he's made us very sincere. It's been, I'm trying to get the amount of time right, Charles, and maybe you know it better than me. Like, it's been decades of trying to do this.
I think 10 years after Best Served Cold is when this takes place.
Gotcha. 10 years after Best Served Cold. So then how many years is that after? Either way, at least a decade. He is significantly older. He's got like a white beard. He's talking about how old he is. Like, the world has changed around them so much. It's definitely been a while. Right. And so he's been at it. This isn't like 6 months here. This is like he's really been at it, and he's been successful to this point, and he gets pushed toward his old habits again when violence arrives at his doorstep. And it's kind of like
it's when you're tempting,
it's like when your addiction returns, like when you have that one taste of it, can you then still resist? And we get to see Logan, because I think it's a battle with addiction.
Oh, definitely.
Is what Logan's dealing with. Yeah. Addiction to violence. And he's been abstinent for a long time. But what happens when he gets another taste of it is kind of the story. And
that's an apt comparison to say Logan is addicted to violence. Really kind of contextualizes his character, because he's basically been sober for all of this time, and then now all of a sudden all this violence is going along around him, and he's kind of scared, not knowing what he's going to be able to do, what he's going to be able to hold back or embrace or anything of that nature. And yeah, it's true. And we get a bunch of fun action pieces with Lamb before it devolves into the ending. But yeah.
Can I speak to... I've always thought about why Abercrombie chose the name Lamb here. And to me, it's always been... I have no idea, but it's always been... I've always speculated that it's been a play on this kind of like wolf in sheep's clothing idea. And lamb, it's like, right? Yeah. So lamb, if it was sheep, I think it'd just be too much on the nose and brings up all these connotations, but it's very, I think, Abercrombie. And if he goes, well, I'll call him Lamb, and a lamb is this kind of docile, brings up those same ideas of a sheep, and the wolf in sheep's clothing is underneath the lamb exterior.
That's true.
We have the Bloody Nine, the most violent man maybe in the whole world. That. So
yeah, that's an apt observation, and I totally, agree. It kind of works in multiple ways. They're both kind of shaped the same. They both start with the letter L, and they're both short names, Logan, Lamb. They're very similar. Lamb in that he's embraced this docile lifestyle. He's committed to being a gentle, nonviolent person. And then this idiom of, a wolf in sheep's clothing is a very apt characterization of his arc in this story. So yeah, I just think the fact that it works on so many levels, it had to have been a calculated choice for sure. So yeah, I think it's brilliant. That's a great point about the sheep's clothing thing.
Loved
it.
Yeah.
And we, Shy and Lamb at the beginning of their journey, I guess we'll talk really quickly about the character Leaf, who makes an appearance in the story. Leaf is also someone like Shy who has lost a brother to the kidnappers and wants to go on this journey as well. And they form this troupe. And what's interesting about Leaf's character is, as soon as we're introduced to him and get him built up like he's going to be a member of the Fellowship, he's gone. And it's a really interesting, creative decision to build him up and then pull the rug out from under him.
Yeah, it's very Abercrombian, and I think, you're touching on such a good point, which is this idea that Abercrombie, he knows the expectations that people are going to have. Oh, it's this young boy who's also seeking the same kind of things as them, and he's going to be a part of this. They're literally calling it a fellowship.
Yes. And it's like, company, fellowship, they go through the words.
So then jumps on board, and we're ready for him to like grow into a hero. If we, at this point, maybe we've reached, like, if you've been reading Abercrombie all along, maybe you're ready for this this like subversion. And I think that it's again, I always think of when Abercrombie subverts as it's not an attempt to deliberately just turn something on its head for the sake of turning it on its head. I've always thought of it as like, well, what would really happen if a boy who is completely unprepared to contribute to this extremely violent world as they travel through this sort of Western setting with tons of dangers, what is most likely to happen to him out there? And he's and they're getting into these battles and stuff, and it's like the most likely outcome, unfortunately, is that he dies because he's not prepared. And it's this classic Abercrombie, you have to be realistic about these things. And I see it more like that than it is like, ooh, look at me, I subverted this stuff again. And I think sometimes Abercrombie people like to, or I don't know, like to, but sometimes people think of him in this like he subverts for subversion's sake way, but I think he just subverts for realism's sake, and that's how I view the Leaf thing.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. I think he honestly was trying to build this character up as someone that could have been a main part of this fellowship, a main presence in the story, and whisked him away because, I mean, there needs to be stakes when the ghosts attack, right? There's this whole thing about Sweet going behind the fellowship's back, right? And talking to the ghosts, and then the ghosts attack and they lose a couple people. They lose the preacher, they lose Leaf, and it was very like unceremonious the way Leaf was just kind of killed off screen in a way, and it happened so fast. It's like, oh, Leaf is gone, and it's like, oh well, like that is bad, and Shive does feel guilty about it, but she's got to move on pretty quickly. So I think all of those things wrapped together deliver more thematically than just subverting a trope of, oh, not every character makes it to the end just because you like them. It's like, well, there's a lot at stake here, and there's a lot of danger here, and not everyone can make it. So that's Leaf. And someone else comes along and joins the fellowship as well, and this is a character that I really enjoy, and that's Temple.
Oh yeah. I thought you'd love Temple.
Temple's great. I'm a big Temple fan.
Yeah, because Temple, I feel like you tend to like these characters. I love Temple too. I think I gravitate more towards Shy, which probably is not surprising for you to hear that. But I think that Temple, he's just kind of this like, he's trying his best. He's kind of thoughtful, but he's not this like, take action, let me take control of my own life, take initiative kind of guy. He's kind of just like, I'm doing my best. Like, I really am trying to be a good dude, but how do I do that in this weird world where everything I try to do, somehow I end up on the wrong side of things? So this kind of like, I think you have an easier time with these like reluctant characters than I do. I love Temple because I think he's like charming, and kind of the self-doubt is interesting with him. And I see this a lot. I do work in vocational psychology as part of my grad program, and I see people sometimes like Temple, where Temple has like a ton of talent at all these different things. He could be so many different things, and he almost has this paradox of choice thing going on for him, which is like, there's so many things he could do, and then everyone tells him he's good at it, And then he's like, what am I supposed to do when I could do anything? And I don't know. He's just a very interesting character. He's kind of in this journey of trying to find his calling. And that's a topic of interest to me.
Yeah, he often describes himself as cowardly, which is in part true, but in another part you can kind of empathize with him a bunch of times. I know one of these first instances is when he bails on famed soldier of fortune Nicamo Casca, of course, who also makes a return, along with another like original First Law Trilogy character. Pike makes an appearance as he's the head of the Inquisition.
Superior.
Yeah, he's superior.
He's a superior.
Oh, yeah, and that is
not Arch. Yeah,
he's not the Archlector. That's Glokta, but he is the superior. He's Glokta's former role, which is fascinating because when the First Law Trilogy ended, Glokta was kind of taking Pike under his wing through the metaphor of torturing Salt. You know, this idea of like coming full circle, being from tortured to torturer to directing the torturing, right? That kind of vicious cycle that was described in Glokta's arc in the original trilogy is coming here, where Pike is now calling the shots. And he's actually hired Casca for some, for good luck with that. And
it doesn't tend to work out so well.
It's a bold move, but you have to remember that Casca
for Glokta.
Exactly, you have to remember that Glokta and Casca have an understanding and that we're able to work together successfully quite a few times. One of the only times in which a client and the hiree were we're able to both come out of it mutually beneficial. And I just think because Glokta just enjoys and understands people like Casca who aren't necessarily good or evil, but are selfish and clever.
Well, here's the thing, and I think Casca's always appreciated Glokta from this perspective of two clever people who understand the world really well.
Yes.
And I think that, and didn't we have on one of those Who Would Win episodes, Charles, didn't we have the random generator spat out a chess match between Glokta and Casca that we were supposed to speculate on?
Maybe.
Who would win?
I think so. That
right?
would be a great match.
That was one of the fun ones. So anyway, point being, so it makes sense why Pike under Glokta would be trying to work with Casca, but you can tell Pike, at least at this point, has not reached Glokta's level of being able to actually, I guess, I don't want to say manipulate, because it doesn't feel like anyone can really manipulate Casca, but ability to work with Casca.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Casca is one of the most he's a very complex person, but his motivations are so simple because they really do boil down, especially at this point in the series, to money. Can you offer him the most money for the minimal amount of work?
Yes.
And Glokta has always understood that you just treat Casca like he is lazy and like he only wants money and he will never let you down. Is kind of Glokta's approach with him. Right. And I think that sometimes people working with Casca, because he's this very complicated, charismatic man, can get lost in the weeds with what's going on with him. But if you treat him he will do the easiest thing for the most amount of money, then that's a good way to do it. And you see him kind of taking those choices as much as possible. But in this book, there's no Glokta level mastermind around there to actually implement that properly as a person to hire.
Well said. It's Pike seems to come off a bit too serious in these early scenes to kind of work with Casca. There's always a few select characters in the First Law universe that see through what I would describe as the smoke and mirrors of society and human characters and ethics and all these things. There's Gloktas, there's Cascas, there's Baez. What was the name of the female POV in the last book? She was kind of like that as well. She was able...
Finri? We're talking about the heroes?
Yeah, the heroes. Yeah, she was able to see through, and I kind of reach an understanding with Baez a little bit. And there's these characters that can just see through all of these things, and they end up developing these like understandings with each other. So Casca and Glocta are very much like that. So when you have these scenes where Temple and his friend Safine were trying to be like, well, let's give the natives a chance to surrender and all these things, and Casca's like, oh, sure, and then just charges anyway. It's a beautiful thing, and that causes Temple's friend to get killed and causes Temple to defect, and he runs into Shivers of all people. It gets attacked by ghosts.
But Shivers helps him out, which is such an interesting...
Shivers is kind of portrayed as this wild card throughout this whole book, and I really enjoyed it because we've gotten to know Shivers so much. Somehow, he was a presence. He ended up being quite a significant presence in the end of the First Law Trilogy. Huge, obviously, POV presence in Best Served Cold, and then he played a very significant role at the end of the Heroes, and now here he is, and he's kind of like unpredictable at these points. It's established like, I don't believe that Logan is dead, and I'm going after him because, and you're like, whoa, it's like, what is going on here? And you never know if he's gonna just like kill you behind the back while you're in the middle of a duel, or if he's gonna like share his food with you and protect you and all these other things.
Yes, and I feel like Shivers has... I'm a little reticent about saying this because I'm like, it's a lot to say. It's very, very high praise for Shivers here. But I feel like Shivers might have my favorite arc all the way through the First Law universe, which is like... I don't know, because there's like Logan, there's Glock, and I'm not saying he's my favorite character.
Right.
But just his arc to take us from what we saw in the original trilogy then to being in each of the standalones and to come to where we'll get to the end eventually, but to come to the point he gets to in the end of this book, and I won't say anything beyond this point to keep from spoilers or anything like that, but I'll just say, I feel like his arc is of most like interest to me throughout this whole thing, his arc.
Interesting. His is way up there. He's one of the few that has like a 6-book long arc, not fully 6, but like him and Logan really, and Logan just kind of appears in this book. He's totally absent from the other two. So they are some of the few characters that get that kind of treatment, and Shivers gets like as much treatment as possible without, he was a main character once, and it's been significant because you get to see like what his intentions were and how he's perceived by others. So it's really powerful stuff. And it's kind of funny, like I was reading this book and I was like, okay, I know Shivers, like it was like Chekhov's gun or whatever. It's like, here he was in the beginning. I know he's coming back at some point. They act like this book is over, and I'm getting down to the last couple pages here, but I know Shivers has to come back. And then when he did, I was like, finally, here we go. And that's a moment that I'm looking forward to talking about, but I don't know if we if we want to be jumping around that much.
Can we just mention, maybe this is coming up later, but the Casca and Shivers moment is amazing.
I love the Casca Shivers one. Yeah, there's a great quote in there that I had saved in our notes that I'm going to find right now. Yeah. But they run into each other. It's like, some Northman is like, causing havoc in the tavern, and Casca goes to investigate. It's like, it's my old pal Shivers. How you doing, buddy? And it's like, what? and they have this whole back and forth. He's got like one of his guys, like Shivers has one of Casca's guys at like got a knife to the neck. It's like, he tried to take my eggs or something like that. Yeah. And it's like,
bad idea. Yeah. Don't take Shivers' eggs.
There was something where it's like, never take eggs from a madman or something, from a one-eyed man or something like that.
Yes.
Never take eggs from a one-eyed man. Write that down.
Was that Casca?
Yeah, that was Casca, and he still had to write it down. And then there's this
Sorbrick.
Yeah, and then Shivers is like, I'm going to find him, and I'm going to get him. He's like, a man with a missing eye after a man with a missing finger. There's a song in there somewhere, I reckon, which is such a great line because it's true. It's like, it's the absurdity of it all that Abercrombie seems to always find in his stories. It's like, you guys are all missing body parts and still looking to kill each other, and it's like, what's going on here? And it's just a funny musing from Casca.
Yeah, and Casca has reached this point of just all-out nihilism, I feel like, by the end of this, and it shows up in so many interesting ways, and I don't know. I think it's so cool from the perspective we talked so much about grimdark lately. We're on Fantasy for the Ages talking about grimdark recently, and you and I have, it's just the grimdark stuff we've talked about so much, and of course Joe Abercrombie's got the Twitter handle Lord Grimdark and is kind of associated with this. And I feel like in a lot of ways Kafka has fully embraced the this is a grimdark world, and his cynicism and pessimism and nihilism are in a lot of ways, I guess, emblematic of being a character that's been alive for this long in an Abercrombie world. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, I'm interested to talk some about how Kafka's arc ends with his death in this,
right?
And also, what that means about the stuff we've talked about with Abercrombie trying to move away from being an all-out grimdark, known for all-out grimdark subgenre writing, and moving toward a more balanced perspective, which I think happens in this book.
Oh, it happens a couple times, actually. This book is one of the more hopeful, happy ending stories of all of them. Mm-hmm. I would say this one probably has the happiest ending of all. I guess the saddest thing is Logan, relapses, but even then it's not so bad. And
we'll talk about the ending.
Because
I have thoughts. Yeah,
we get there. We need to get there. So let's get there quickly now, because we have Temple. I love this moment where Shai rescues Temple and basically brings him into this indentured servitude, and is like, okay, you owe me 300 whatever, and every time you do something, I'll take it off your debt or whatever. It's like, oh, you fix this thing, you get this much money. Basically keeping him working for free forever, kind of a thing. And after this attack from the ghosts, organized by Sweet, that killed Leaf, killed the preacher, Temple kind of takes up this preacher role. And there's something ironic in that he's not really a religious guy. He used to be a priest and then was kind of disenfranchised by the whole thing and left. And now that this caravan of people, this fellowship needs him, he can step up and say things that people really like. And he ends up being a really effective preacher in this fellowship, even though he hardly believes a word that he's saying. It's a really interesting, very Abercrombian kind of theme about religion and what these people believe in, and how, does it really matter if you believe in it or not if you're rallying the people and causing a positive effect in this troop, is really quite interesting to see Temple struggle with that. The fact that he does kind of struggle with it at times, but still tries to do a good job, I think is very admirable.
It is admirable, and of course he's named Temple is kind of adding to this whole mix here. And he was there when in the Siege of Dagaska, which we'll remember from Before They Are Hanged, where Glocta's trying to, I guess you could say he's trying to defend the city. Temple doesn't make a literal appearance in the book, but we know in Before They're Hanged, but we know from Temple's musings about his past that he was there for that awful event. Mm-hmm. And it's hard he was in the temple, I guess, and I'm blanking on the name. It's like Kadia or something like that, who's the preacher who was interacting with Glocta a lot, kind of representing the Dagascan natives there.
Right.
That was Temple's leader of his
Glocta had admiration for that guy.
Yes.
That was the guy who they entered the peace talks and it's like, look, we'll deliver the chest. You can say whatever you want is in it, but there'll be nothing in it. And
no, that was a different guy. That was a different guy. Okay. That was the emissary who came.
Oh, got it. So this was one Glocta was actually in Dagaska.
Yes.
Okay, I'm with you. Got it.
It was the guy, but you're right that he had admiration for the guy, and it was kind of the guy who he would just kind of sit there during the meetings and then come out with this line that would tell everyone that it's all BS and things like that. And Glocta could kind of level with this guy, and Glocta was showing the native Dagaskans a lot more,
Oh, he was the representative of the natives in Dagaska.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I remember that character for sure. Yeah, Glockner did admire that guy. And that guy like stuck to his principles a lot.
He did.
He wouldn't sell out his people or his position or anything like that. And they were able to come to some kind of agreement, actually. I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that guy died during the Siege of Dagaska, and Temple, folks can tweet at me. I'll give them my personal account to tweet at me, so you don't get bugged there, Charles. Can tweet at me at Dylan R. Marsh on Twitter if I'm messing this up. But I do believe that character, I think it's like Cardia or something like that, he died in Dagaska, and then Temple was there as a member of that temple. And kind of had to watch that happen. And that guy was a very noble dude who, stood by his guns, like you're saying, Charles. And then that's part of where Temple's kind of like, why would I believe in any of this stuff comes from, where he had to watch a very devout, good person go down for what he believed in for seemingly no reason. Like this fight between the Union and the Gurkish over this tiny piece of like what used to be a middle land, like not actually owned by either one.
Right.
And so he's kind of lost. He's lost his faith. And who could blame him after everything that he's been through? So, irony that you're talking about.
Yeah, that idea
Charles,
of trying to find a purpose, find a reason to exist in this world is Temple's like biggest arc in the story, and I like where it ends up. It's always been this like hopefulness that we've talked about throughout the whole series, that as much as Abercrombie's Lord Grimdark, we also say, well, there's these hopeful notes, and Temple is really starting to highlight these themes. But of course, it's like the last standalone. You have to read 6 books to get to this point, but we really are starting to see this more embracing and more explicit mentioning of purpose and hopefulness and all of that. And Temple does a great job of personifying that. But right now he's struggling.
Yes, and Charles, I just went to the First Law Wiki to get this right. It is Kadia, and under Red Country for the First Law Wiki, it says Temple is a former priest who served under Kadia in Dagaska, and as was Safine, apparently, his friend who died. And then they mentioned Kadia a few times, and it's strongly implied that they lined up all the priests and asked him to step forward, and apparently Kadia stepped forward and was killed to save the lives of the others. Nice. So Temple watched that play out, and he's like, what is the point of any of this? I guess I'll just go be Casca's lawyer, which is like ultimate giving up on morality is being Casca's lawyer.
Yeah, and I love, again, this embracement of modern ideas. Casca throughout this whole story says over and over again that the world is changing, because he's like a guy approaching retirement who was very much an embodiment of the old ways of this mercenary life. And he's like, now the world is fought with like pen and paper. He's able to understand that he can use the law to do what armies used to be able to do, and he's trying to get Temple on board with all of that, and groom Temple essentially to take over, which is kind of revealed at the end of all of this. But it's so interesting to see Temple and Casca like go at it and like have this hot and cold relationship, and Temple eventually just walks away from the whole thing, and I admire that about him. And it's also just interesting to see like Casca's point of view in all this, which is like, it's the law is the future. I see it coming. We always know Casca's amongst all things, he's a survivor, and he'd be willing to throw away everything he grew up believing if it means getting coins today. So the fact that he's on the pulse of all of this and sees it coming is a really interesting sign of the times. But before we get into Casca again, we do have this interesting moment where, the ghosts attack the Fellowship, and then, like, Sweet, it has this relationship with the ghost. It's kind of public knowledge, but it's realized that he actually also has a partnership with them to scam people. But in this case, they get a meeting with to discuss a truce, right? And I think the guy's name is Sanjeed. and they're in these peace talks, and Lamb just kills the guy. And I bring this up because, it's the beginning of these cracks in Lamb's character where people are kind of shocked by his acts of violence because they don't know Logan Nine Fingers. Like in the First Law Trilogy, everyone knew who he was and what he was capable of. But people's perception of Lamb is that he's a gentle giant. And then they see him make these really drastic, violent moves with excellent efficiency and like no emotion whatsoever. He's just like, bam, you're dead. It's like, and anyone else want to try and negotiate with me? I'll kill you right now. And everyone's like, whoa, okay. It's the first big crack in the surface of Lamb, and people who know that this is Logan and know Logan's character are like, oh, this is just the beginning of probably what's to come. I read that and I was like, oh boy, Lamb's coming back.
We get the moment at like a saloon of sorts where he does get violent with those. I think there's 3 of them or something.
Right.
And that one felt like the first chink in the armor or whatever.
But in that one, he was like provoked and he was like, guys, leave me alone. You don't want to fight me. Right. And they're like, shut up, old man. So he kills them like maybe a bit violently, but at least in that one, it was provoked. This was a peace talk.
This is just cold. Yeah, this is just the first cold blood.
Yes.
Like, oh, that's a bloody 9 move.
Right.
That's not a Logan 9. Logan is more like what he did with the 3 in the saloon, like, oh, you push me to this, and in his head, if we know from his old point of views, it'd be like, have to be realistic about these things, and now they're just tasks to get done, and it's like, okay, Logan, like, good if you don't kill people, but we understand what's happening here,
right?
And then we get this peace talk moment, and this guy was built up a lot, this guy he killed,
Sanjeev.
and then he's just Sanjeev, and then he's just like, and they were about to come to a pretty reasonable agreement. And Logan, but the funny thing is too, and this I think reflects this, it reflects a lot of these discussions we've had about Logan, like our being realistic about Logan Nine Fingers episode that we did way back, which is like not long after, people are starting to paint Logan as a hero for doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that reflects a lot of how Logan gets treated by a lot of the fan base and how we love Logan as a character. We think he's he might be my favorite character in the genre.
Right.
But that being said, we don't see him as a hero.
Right.
We never have. And it's like, except, maybe on our first read, we were seeing him has moved toward that. But for a long time, we've never seen Logan as a hero. But meanwhile, just the place he's positioned in these stories ends up putting him in this like hero role. Mm-hmm. But it's easier to see from Shai's perspective than it was to see from Logan's perspective why this is a person who is acting like a wacko, even when he is being told by everyone around him that he's such a hero. So I don't know. That's part of what I love about Shai's perspective here is that I think we get more of a view into this stuff of why Logan is not a heroic person in his behaviors without as much of the Logan like telling us why he
we get his actions on paper versus going through his rationalizations. Well, which again, if he's addicted to violence, he can talk himself into doing any kind of act. But when we get it and it's like, oh yeah, we're actually coming to peace talks with this respected leader of these people. It's like, oh, and then Lamb reaches across and just, buries a blade in the guy's head. Right. And it's like, what?
Here's the thing, Charles, and I've talked about this before, is like I speculate on the extent to which the Bloody Nine is actually another personality, or if it's just what happens when Logan like sees white because he's going angry. I don't know if all of us have experienced like getting so angry that it feels like we're not like even seeing straight or anything like that, but that's a human experience. That's not just like a multiple personality thing. Right. It's just a thing that happens sometimes when it's like, if you think of like Colin West, right? Mm-hmm. He has moments where he gets furious and he's just can't even see straight and he does these really terrible things. But the way Colin thinks about those is like, wow, that's a part of me that's ridiculously angry.
Right.
But the way Logan thinks about it is, I have this whole other personality inside of me. And maybe he does have a whole other personality, but I think part of what we get in Red Country is does that even matter at the end of the day, whether it's another personality or not, or does what matters the fact that they were about to have peace and then this guy just came in and killed the person and made it way worse.
Yes, and that's what's so excellent about having like the way Abercrombie decided to treat one of his most well-loved characters. He so easily could have brought him back and given the fans everything that they wanted, but he chooses to commit to the Lamb role. And we know that the Bloody Nine is a thing that exists in Logan, but it's never acknowledged in this book. It's just written as like, oh, something in Lamb's face kind of shifted and he calmed down and he was able to kill all these people. And like, even he says, oh, Shy, don't come near me when I'm in, like, just stay here and let me handle this, was something that comes up so often. And then Shy's like, what's going on here? You just tried to kill me. What are you talking about? And she like falls out of love with this guy that basically raised her. She gets scared that much and he becomes that unpredictable that she's no longer comfortable confiding in him. It's such a brilliant thing that we know from knowing Logan, but because, like you had mentioned, Dylan, because we're just seeing the actions for the actions, they are alarming and they make him very unlikable to the point where you can like disown your own stepfather who raised you and protected you and even now is still trying to save your siblings. You know, it's incredible in that way. And that's like the shining moments of these books. This book particular.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard people say like Red Country is really where I soured on Logan, and that makes sense because
it's the point of it.
It's kind of, it does feel like, it feels like part of what Abercrombie is doing is saying, oh, wait, you didn't believe me that Logan is a bad dude? Check out what it's like when you have a person who thinks of him as a good person and then watches his behaviors for what they are and isn't in his head about it. So, I don't know. It's just incredible. It's why I love Red Country. If I love Logan as a character, and to me, Red Country shines because of using Shy's perspective as a kind of... Shy's actually a much more like realistic, reasonable person than Logan is. And I think she's just very pragmatic and she's done bad things. She's done good things. She tries her best. And being in that perspective and seeing Logan's actions for what they are, I've just always loved that so much. And that's why Red Country is my favorite, is because watching Logan's journey through the eyes of someone who believes in him at the start.
I mean, it's such great
like waivers.
That's a great reason to have this book be your favorite. You make a great case because it's true. There's so much payoff in this book. It signals like the end of an era for not only the world of First Law, but like Abercrombie as an author as well. And a lot of these characters that people love, that we've always got these vibes on, are now being explored in really complex ways. It's kind of like turning the mirror back on yourself and seeing the ugly truth a little bit. But it's like, I love Logan. He's like, oh, he's so badass in these First Trilogy and all of his isms are so great and he's such a nice guy. And it's like, oh, we don't really want to see like the other side of his character. You know, it's almost uncomfortable. And like you said, it disenlightens me from the character, but like, that's what makes it so beautiful. It puts a stain on like the flagship character of First Law, but Abercrombie's commitment to doing that I admire so much, because this is a character you could have been like, everyone's favorite, Logan Ninefingers back for more fun.
He's back.
And it's like, no, people need to realize this character that I created for like all parts of him, and I really want to explore this character more, and it kind of highlights these less likable sides of him. Like, this is not a likable guy. No one's gonna say Lamb's the best character ever. It's like, this was a dude we thought was nice and turned out to be not nice. Like, what's great about that? Like, if you read this book not knowing who Logan was, you wouldn't walk away being like, best character in fantasy, because of so much that rests on the shoulders of the original trilogy. And it's such a brave move as an author to take your flagship character from your flagship series and just totally invert the point of view of him and show the side of him. It's so ambitious and ingenuitive. I just love it.
Well said, Charles. Yeah, so let me grab this quote comes way later, but it's so relevant to what we're talking about, where Logan's reflecting on his actions, or Lamb is, and he says, I don't feel evil, but the things I've done, what else can you call them? And that's just, it's a, right?
Right.
Doesn't that say it all? You don't think you're that, but then you take a real look at your actions for what they are, and you almost kill your own like stepchild that you love, and you mess up these peace talks and all the other things we saw him do in the original trilogy. Kill Duru, and like
he killed what's his face's son. He killed Thunderhead.
Yes.
Yeah, he's
Rattle. Let me get
beloved of the moon. Kamiki Fail.
Yeah,
Kamiki Fail's kid. Yeah.
All these things, and it's like Logan stepping back and just saying, "Hey, like when you're in it, when you're you don't feel like you're an evil person. He's always trying his best. He's trying to be a better man. But at the end of the day, he's able to have these moments of like, look at my behaviors. How can I even justify to myself at this point that I'm not evil?"
Right.
And
there's, there's so many moments that highlight this. I remember like when Lamb fights Wardenor, who is the one who kind of takes in Ro and Lamb and kind of indoctrinates Ro into this family, makes her feel loved and all of that. And Lamb, the way Lamb wins is by going to actually kill Ro, and Wardenor, or however you say his name, sacrifices himself to protect her.
Werdener, I think.
Werdener. And it's like, this is Lamb. Lamb is someone who was in our like bloody rage about to kill Ro, the person he set out to save. And it just shows the whole farce of Lamb's entire philosophy on violence. He's like, oh, I'm here to save Ro, that's why I'm on this mission. That may be, but you're also having no problems killing her too, because this was just your outlet for violence. And it's how he wins this battle. It's just like incredibly fascinating. It's again, we know that and there's always this doubt, right? Because it's never confirmed whether the Bloody Nine is a condition or just Logan, like a part of Logan's actual character. But it doesn't matter in these moments. He's scaring the people that he loves, and eventually he recognizes that he has to leave and be alone. And it's just that is his arc, essentially, is that this is who I am. And if that means I can't be around other people that are good, then I have to go, kind of a thing. And so, and I guess, should we just get into that? Yeah,
Charles?
let's get into it.
We were saving that, but I actually think of that as Logan's redemption.
Yes,
is his choice to leave.
Oh, for sure.
And there's some people, I've heard people call it like him giving up. And I'm like, this guy tried for a long time to do better.
You can tell that that's the life that he really wants, is to just be with, or that's his ideal life. And him coming to terms with the idea that he can't shake this violent side of himself, and that's just the kind of person that he is. Like, no one's born perfect, and we have to accept our faults. His faults are pretty exceptional, in that he's like a bloodthirsty maniac addicted to violence, but he's embraced that about himself at the end, and he's been fighting it his whole life with all of his isms and his quests and his do-good mindset. And this is the first time in 6 books that this main character that everyone loves has acknowledged this fault in himself in a way that he's willing to like actually embrace it and accept it. Like, yes, he's always said violence doesn't do anyone good. Leave that to someone dumb enough to do it like me. But you actually feel like by leaving this family that he's able to like fully accept it in a way he really hadn't at the end of the First Law Trilogy.
Yeah, that's so well said, Charles. And there's this quote that says, I love you, and then, but my love ain't a weight anyone should have to carry.
Wow.
And that is just, I don't know, it's like beautiful from Lamb in a way where it's like, at a certain point when you have a full lifetime of hurting everyone around you, making everyone around you's life worse, the best that you could possibly hope to accomplish is to leave them be and let them just live their own lives, especially someone like Shy, who's been able to find a way. I mean, we're way ahead of, I don't know how much you want to talk about the plot stuff.
I think we just address all the endings at this point, considering where we are time-wise, and they're the best things anyway.
Right. I mean, people know what happened in the book if they read it. So it's like, okay, yeah. So Shy and Temple reach this point together of actually seeming like, they are vulnerable with each other. They kind of make up for each other's faults in a lot of ways. They are better together than they are individually because of they're just a good fit for each other, and that's kind of the sense that you get. And they seem both capable of actually living a fulfilling life together and raising these two kids, and Lamb just doesn't see his place in that anymore. The best he can hope for is that these things that spin through Shy's head every once in a while, like you have to be realistic about these things and stuff like that, that she can wield those axioms better than Lamb can. And it's kind of this like, hey, like now you two take a shot at this. You've actually got a real shot at this. What can I possibly help with at this point besides going away so you don't, like, no one gets killed by the next person who tracks me down wanting to settle a score. And he's lucky it was Shivers who's always grappling with this sense of morality and what's right. And we can get more into Shivers too.
Right, but before we do this, you were talking about Shy and Lamb, and I love that final moment that you're talking about where Lamb is saying that he has to leave. And Shy is the first character in this whole series, and I love this moment at the end of this book where she just straight up calls him out. And one of the things that I've loved throughout this whole book is the context of Shy saying, "You're some kind of coward." And she said that from the beginning when he was too scared to like stand up for himself in confrontations, his meek demeanor in the beginning, right? Which she misunderstood as being cowardly when in actuality he's just laying low, right? Oh, on the Lamb. Another reason to use Lamb.
I didn't. In all my thinking, I never, which now I feel like, well said, Charles.
I hope people that listen to the beginning have stuck through to this part here. So
me too.
So they think, hey, they actually got all of it. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, God. Thank you, Charles. Thank you. That
I actually unironically was thinking he's on the Lamb, and then I had to make the connection from there. So even worse.
Smart. Yours is, who knows? I think it's more likely that Abercrombie was thinking about what you were saying than it is that he was thinking about what I was saying.
Yes, but I think he was realizing more and more the many, like, that's what, 4 layers now in which that name is a fun choice, so he's on the Lamb, right? And he's laying low. But Shy, and he's a coward for leaving because he's not he's like not willing to like make it work with his family, right? Because he says, "I'm leaving," and then she says, "You've always been a coward," and then Lamb says he never denied it and leaves, and that's this book ends, which it's sad, but it's also such a finite moment, it's such like a buttoned up thing for everyone's arc where it's like Lamb is like, I never denied it, and now I'm embracing it, and now I'm doing something about it, and I'm leaving. And it's, you were a coward for not, for being a meek person, and then now you're a coward for like leaving your family. And it's the sense of like, did Lamb do the right thing to ride off in the sunset? And it's like, they're probably safer without him, but is there ever a reason to abandon your family? Like, it's such a complex, finite moment. I just love Shy for calling him out on all of that, and it's so refreshing because I feel like we've been kind of calling out Logan, and we've been a minority in that kind of voice, and then to just hear it straight up through Abercrombie's narrative, being like, you don't just get to ride off in the sunset like an epic action hero. You're a flippin' coward. You are a coward. And he's like, I never denied it. And Finn. And you're like, what?
Well,
so beautiful.
So insightful, Charles. I appreciate your perspective there. And I've always thought about, what does Logan mean when he says, I never denied it? Mm-hmm. And I think he means that the cowardly thing is his inability to this point to walk away from violence. Mm-hmm. Right? And maybe his inability ever to walk away from violence for good. And the cowardly thing is to go back to his old ways of violence. And at this point, what he's tried to do is accept the fact that he's a coward and say, I'm not brave enough to completely give up on violence. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that I'm capable of that. That takes more courage than I have.
Yeah.
So what I do have the ability to do is to walk away and go be violent or attract violence, probably both, wherever I end up. And that's how I think Logan thinks of himself, as a coward, rather than that he's just a coward for. I think he does still think he's doing the right thing by walking away.
It's true, and I think when he also says that he's never denied it, like, he's never had this opinion of himself that was like, oh, I'm the strongest person ever, and I'll kill everyone. He's always like had this self-loathing piece to him, and he's always like, oh, leave the violence to someone stupid enough like me, ho ho, and like. You get kind of annoyed. It's like, that's not a good justification for your actions. You can't just say, oh, I'm not a good person, I'm a violent person, I always make more scores. It's like, you're choosing to do those things, and that's what makes him a coward. And I think the fact that he never denied that was like, oh, I've always made these justifications for myself, but I never fully believed them. And I think that is another layer to why he said he's never denied being a coward. He's like, I've come up with all these isms and these reasons and these excuses, but I'm accepting that, look, at the end of the day, I just really like violence as well. And I've never said that I didn't just like violence. And it's kind of like that's why Shai's calling him out in these moments. Like, that's not an excuse to say that you've never denied being cowardly. It's not a justification for being a violent person.
Well said, Charles. And I think it's interesting to hear it from Shai, because the way I think about Shai's arc from beginning to end in this series is she's holding this piece of her that she thinks she's a bad person throughout, because she killed someone and got someone else hanged because of it, not on purpose, but stuff happens when you're being an outlaw, and that happened to her, and she's holding that this whole book, and then she's able to get her own redemption and forgiveness by basically telling Temple and having him be like, I accept you and love you anyway, even though I know the truth. Right. And the way that Logan has chosen to try to deal with the fact that he has this ridiculously bloody past has been to hide it and to be a lamb in, to be a wolf in lamb's clothing, if you will, and to pretend he'd never had any of that bloody past, even though people could literally see it on his face, because he's covered in scars and people can just see it. So Logan has chosen to try to get redemption by hiding from his past, and Shai reaches actual redemption in her arc by confessing her past to someone who's able to hear it and provide her with what in the therapy biz we'd call a corrective emotional experience by saying, hey, no, I still love you even though you did that thing. And Shai can move on with her life because she's forgiven herself and sees other people forgiving her, someone she really believes in, forgiving her. Right. She gives that to Temple as well, because Temple has his cowardly moment where he jumps out the window, and then she has every reason to walk away from him, but she forgives him for that. Right. And they both kind of forgive each other for their pasts and their big mistakes. Temple thinks he's always been a huge coward, like you've mentioned, Charles. And then he's forgiven for being a coward. Shai's forgiven for her own cowardice, if you will, or her own violence and like murder and all this stuff. The person getting hanged in her place. And she's like, I don't even know why I'm here, all stuff. They both accept and forgive each other, and now it feels like they will move on and be able to be happy. Right. And Logan has never been able to actually confess or forgive himself or be forgiven by others. And that's, to me, why Logan can't move on. He can't accept his past and move
right.
forward.
And by not denying being a coward, that's another one of his excuses to ride off in the sunset instead of sitting down and having a long conversation and moving on with his family. And while you've opened that can of worms about, let's talk about Shai and Temple, because their relationship to me is so significant in like what these Abercrombie isms that we've talked about, like this idea of hope. And why I love Shai and Temple as a couple so much is that they're both trying to make sense of this world and find purpose and meaning and like puzzle out like what can they get out of this like harsh, like unforgiving, violent place that they live in. Like what can they get out of it? What hope do they have in just existing in this world? And Temple's, he's, like we've said, he's worn many hats, he's tried many things, he considers himself a coward, he's done cowardly things, but he's always in the pursuit of something, and he maybe doesn't even know what the right ethics play is or moral decision is in any given time, but he's always searching. And I think that's what Shai kind of saw in him, and that's why they made such a good couple, is that he doesn't claim to be perfect by any means or know what he wants out of life, but he's always trying. His intentions are clearly good. And I think Shai, in a way, thinks that, likes being around that, and the idea that you can be good even though you're messed up or you're cowardly or whatever. And then we get to the end of this book where they wind up together and in a happy relationship. To me, it's like, look, that's the whole point. Like when you read that Galacta quote way back when we did the Galacta character study about like, look, you take the little hopes, the little victories that you can and bring good into the life where you can, and you exist around that. And that is what is being brought home in Red Country, this embrace of like, we may live in this red country, but it's these little glimmers of hope that we can carve out for ourselves. The fact that, I can own a general store and also a woodworking / legal office and be able to raise children and be in a happy family. Like that is it. That is the hopeful thing that we can get out of this. And that's not something you'd see in a grimdark novel where these two people, or maybe you would. Like, this is what grimdark's evolving into, this whole glimmer of hope.
Right. And maybe it's not grimdark anymore. Like, we know that Abercrombie doesn't like that phrasing to describe his work anymore. He's just kind of stuck in, that's his Twitter handle. But he does see himself as moving on. I do too. And it's interesting because we've talked about this like John Gwynn's work. We've talked about this with Monstrous. That's Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda's graphic novel series and things like that. Is this idea of a world that is grimdark around people, but then how can people find their own meaning in a world that Abercrombie's world, to my understanding, does not seem to have much objective meaning to it, meaning that like it's not like Robert Jordan's like there's a pattern and a wheel of time and all does it for a reason and all this kind of stuff. It's like there's a line in here that's about how the world doesn't have meaning, and it's literally the world out. This is the like titular line. The world out there is a red country without justice, without meaning. Meanwhile, we get these characters like Shai and Temple that, and Beck, honestly, in the Heroes, also does this. Yeah, kind of like are able to carve out their own subjective sense of meaningfulness in a world that doesn't provide them with any clear direction of, like, this is the purpose of your life. The Abercrombie's world's not going to give you that. Right. But you can try to find someone to be with that can make you happy in it. You can try to find a simple life and settle down. And Shai and Temple really seem to succeed at that in something Logan always told other people to do but wasn't able to do himself. And in that way, I think Logan really kind of finds a little bit of a sense of meaning of like, if I get out of here now, the story I can tell myself is I prepared Shai and Ro and Pitt to have a fulfilling life and do better than me. Right. and he rides off into the sunset with that in his head. And I think that gives Logan a sense of meaning in this meaningless
And it's
world.
why I find Lord Grimdark himself to be actually very hopeful, because it's idea of like, look, the world is not going to give you meaning. You have to make it. You have to find it. And whatever it is, it's yours, right? What is the meaning that you want to carve out in this? He creates this grimdark world without meaning and justice, this red country, right? But it's what the characters do and how they try to find their own meaning that I find to be very hopeful and very encouraging. Like this idea of Shy and Temple living a happy life together. I mean, what the heck is that? That's like the most hopeful thing like ever.
Right.
And it's a great way to send off this 6-book world that we've gotten. It's like, hey, look, people can be happy when they choose to find meaning for themselves and create these hopeful things for themselves and affect change where they can.
Can I say too, Charles, something, and that's so well said. I'm trying to build on what you just said with what comes up for me, which is that I think part of why you and I find this ending to be so extremely hopeful is because it feels so earned after that 6-book journey of like, holy crap, this always seems to go awry and this world is so messed up and these characters seem to be trying their best. But in the end of the day, the world is just too messed up for them. And then to have the standalones get this send-off, like you're saying, of, no, you can actually do this in a way that ends happy. It's just ridiculously hard and takes tons of work and forgiveness and acceptance. And it's not glorious. It's just simple. That is, to me, why this sticks out, because it's like a beacon of like a light, like I don't know how to describe it, like a candle in the darkness. It's like it shines so brightly in contrast to the things that we've witnessed so far. So a happy ending in a Joe Abercrombie novel to me it just like feels even more hopeful than a happy ending in a series by an author that kind of always gives it to you. It feels so earned.
Right.
And
yeah it's so true. And to earn it in this series is such an accomplishment, and I don't think anyone's been as successful as Shy and Temple. Man, there's so many more things I want to talk about. Like Roe is super interesting, but I think there's one character ending that we just have to talk about before time is up, and that is Nikimo Casca, famed soldier of fortune. So let's talk about this man right now. Dylan, I see you're just excited to share something, so let's hear it.
Well, I want to talk a little Shivers too. I think we covered
Shivers
a lot of
too.
Him, but so Shivers and Casca, I think
we can end on Shivers because it's like one of those final scenes, and Casca aligns with Shivers in the beginning there too. So
yeah, so Casca's reached this point of just nihilism where he's like, I've had and lost and had and lost and had and lost throughout my whole life, and the only thing by the end of it that he can see as having any worth to him is money. Like he has a lot. I'm having trouble finding. I thought I wrote down the quote of it, but he's basically like a single piece of gold is worth 10,000 promises. Is kind of the way that he's seen it, because he's lived in this world so long, and he's just reached this point of outright, almost. It's like a weird, like realistic, like cynicism, where the part that most sticks out to me is when he has this moment with Werdener, where Werdener is like, legitimately Werdener tried his best throughout all of this. He tried to actually save Roe at one point. He seems to be collecting all of these children with hopes of giving them a better life. And all of that said, he's kind of at this point where he's at Casca's mercy, and he's trying to save all his money toward the, waking the metal dragon. And Casca is like, I want the money. You can't give me any of these promises that are going to be worth more than that to me. I've been promised dukedoms. I've been all this stuff. And then Werner says, I tried to do what was best. And Casca says, which just feels like we've said Casca is kind of to me feels like how Abercrombie sees the world in a lot of ways, like a more direct way of Abercrombie speaking to the reader. I can't say for sure. I don't know Joe Abercrombie or anything, but this is my sense after reading a lot of him, where he says, so Werner says, I tried to do what was best. And Casca says, of course, believe it or not, so do we all. And then there's like a ... It's like, friendly? And then Casca has him killed.
Yeah.
And that's the point that Casca has reached here, which is kind of this thing that I feel like we've seen throughout the First Law universe to this point, which is each of these individual point of view characters are like always trying to tell themselves a story about how they are the hero. They are doing their best. Logan, we've seen that for so long. And it's the more introspective ones that, and oftentimes like people who do better things, who are more like questioning if they're a good person. Like we saw that from Kern Crawl a lot in the heroes. So it's like, oh, I don't know if I'm a good person. It's like everyone's telling you you're an actual good person. It's like all that stuff. That being said, everyone's a hero of their own story and everyone's trying their best. And Casca has reached this point of almost like, but that's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's not good enough to try your best and tell yourself that I don't even care anymore.
Yeah.
And Casca has lost it because he's almost like too aware of what's going on around him here that he's given up.
Yeah.
And it's like you almost need to lie to yourself a little bit in Abercrombie's world to believe. You have to lie to yourself or just like run away with like one other good person, like Shai and Temple tried to do. And it's like Casca's seen it all. And it feels almost like this, this may be me trying to get too capital L literature about this. I know I get some comments about this sometimes, but I'll say I feel like when Abercrombie has Casca get killed off too, and killed off by Sorbrick, the writer
of his own hired autobiographer there.
Yes, by a writer. It feels like Joe Abercrombie trying to finally put the final nail in the coffin of the grimdark way of looking at things as like everyone is trying their absolute best. I believe that, but they still suck is kind of Casca's way of thinking about it. And Abercrombie saying, I've written a lot about that and maybe I'm done now.
Yes,
and that's
the point.
Done here.
Yes, that's the point that I was going to make because it's absolutely true and it's so well observed, Dylan. And the further connection that I did not make was that it's a writer that kills Casca and the significance of that, Abercrombie obviously being the author of the book, because we've said for a long time that Casca was kind of like this extension of voice from Abercrombie to comment on the world that we live in, this red country, as we say, without meaning and justice and all that. And someone like Casca just thriving in a world without meaning by being able to compromise his own morals and the sides that he's on and things like that to get ahead in the original trilogy. And I feel like this is such a significant moment here in Red Country to see Casca on the edge of retirement, losing all purpose in this world and ultimately getting killed penniless with nothing. It's a mark of the times that have changed, and it's to me it's an obvious how more direct than having a writer kill him is it than like a conscious decision of not only the change in times of the First Law as a setting for a fantasy series, but also as Abercrombie as a writer. His philosophy is changing. Like one of the things for me, it's like when you read a character who's like the Johnny Depp Jack Sparrow character where they're charming, they play both sides, they're rogue, yada yada yada, but Abercrombie's themes have become so much more complex than that since then. Like obviously there's subverting classic tropes and being grimdark and embodying all of that, but it's gotten so much more complex than that, and there's so much more these ideas of finding hope and meaning and embracing these parts of yourself and all these other things that have I think we've mentioned that from what we've seen Abercrombie tweet and post and stuff, that he's also hit this point for himself creatively. It's like I'm kind of moving away from these things, and this book, the whole time through this book, it's very clear that the world is moving away from the First Law, and Casca was kind of like the last holdout of the glory days of the First Law as it was in the original trilogy. And we know from even in the second book when we tried to kill Casca and it didn't pan out, very Jack Sparrow-like, very rogue-like, and he's back. But now in this book, the betrayal of Temple hits so much deeper because we know he was betrayed by Mons Mercado, and these were the only two times he's really tried to let people in, and he's been betrayed both times, even though he's loved them and things like that. And so when you see him, he's basically like totally lost it by the end of this when he realizes that he was betrayed by that whole scene with the mayor, who I believe is Carla Dan Eider, by the way, is the mayor.
Yeah, I believe so too. That's an astute observation on your first read.
Because Casca knew who she was, and they mentioned Dagosca and all that, and I was like, what other woman could it possibly be? And Carla's a survivor. I got to give her credit too. Like, she's a survivor for sure, and even like going up, like being on the wrong side of Glokta and still being able to succeed is very impressive. So she's out there doing her thing, and they had that whole scene with the playwright, who was another like loaded gun that I was like, what are they going to do with this playwright character that they wrote into this, like this actor? And then they had that whole ruse scene, which I was, I could take or leave, but it happened, and it was kind of fun, I suppose. And when he realized he was betrayed, he stands there with nothing and is like, he's said throughout this whole thing, the times are changing, like I see it coming, but a man like me is from an older time. And he's talking to Logan as well sometimes too, and it's interesting the people he opens up to about that. And he goes, I've seen it all, I see the world, it's losing all of its magic, losing all of its meaning, blah blah blah, to the point now where he's just like been so tricked, so betrayed, so penniless that he's like borderline ranting when the writer stabs him and kills him. And then he's like, my last words, I had something for this, what were they? I remember. And then he's gone. It's one of those things where it's like, wow, what a like sad change of the times, change of the guard that we have going with the end of Casca. I don't know, to me it's felt like such a statement on the thematic shifts that Abercrombie's writing is going through to finally write off Casca, who, like we said for so long, was kind of championing this lawless nature of the First Law series, and now he's gone, and now we're supposed to enter a new trilogy, and it's like, well, what does that mean, and what kind of world are we going to step into with the new trilogy? And it's like, I'm excited to find out.
I'm excited for you to find out too, Charles. That feels like it could be, it's so well said that I almost want to punctuate it and be like, well, let's get that that dab sweet. The dab sweet, right? It has been getting a lot of credit in this one. That dab sweet outro music pumping. But that being said, I do want to talk a little about Shivers. I think we've circled around this some already. And I do see, once Casca is dead and we've kind of sloughed off this grim, dark way of seeing the world, then things do get a chance to start getting a little more hopeful. And we talked about how it happens with Shy and Temple. We talked about how it does even happen with Logan. And now we can talk how it happens with Shivers, because Shivers has come all the way back around by the end of this to the same ending he got in the First Law Trilogy, which is this position of wanting to kill Logan, getting his opportunity to play a role in killing Logan, which is his big like vengeance score thing that actually we know like doesn't really have any reasonable basis because he hated his brother anyway, even though we know that his like it's just a like score for score's sake thing, which we've seen Logan struggle with so much and so many other characters struggle with the Pharaoh and all stuff. And we see Shivers circle all the way back to his hopeful ending of the First Law Trilogy, which is like, maybe I can do better than Logan did. And he steps away he came all this way. He's done all of these messed up things, Charles, and then he finds Logan. He takes one look at the kids, and he's like, what am I doing? And he just tells Logan, I guess I'll just say that that nine-fingered man is dead. And it's so interesting for a character that we've seen struggle so much with trying to be a better man.
Yes.
To actually
because he
get the
actually
chance
asks
to-
Logan several questions about
Yeah.
like, why are you out here? And Logan was like, tried to make a better start for myself. And because we know Logan's Shiver's whole thing was being a better man in Best Served Cold, that Logan said the right thing to really resonate.
Craw.
Oh, Craw?
Yeah.
Who's asking Craw?
He was asking. I'm saying he was asking Kernan Craw in the Heroes as well. So we've seen this across so many books.
Yeah.
The Dog Man in the First Law Trilogy.
Yes.
Then he's struggling throughout the whole Best Served Cold with this question and just debating Monza and all stuff. And then he goes back the other way to, I guess I'm just a killer, which is kind of what Logan's telling himself by the end here. But it feels kind of too late for Logan, but we'll see. But I don't want to. But anyway, then we see him in the Heroes asking Kernan Craw, like, "Hey, you're a good man. How's this work?" And finally, he's asking Logan again in Red Country, and he's making the better decision. I don't know. It's like Shivers at least actually listens to people and tries.
Yeah.
I just love that about Shivers, and to see almost this kind of like Casca way of, like Casca said, "Hey, if you give people time, they change back." You remember
Yes.
he says that at like the end of Best Served Cold when he starts drinking again. But to see Shivers do his version of changing back is to go back to making a good decision. The way that he made a good decision at the end of First Law Trilogy is kind of like, well, if people can revert to these bad patterns of behavior, maybe they can also revert to these good patterns of behavior. And that's so hopeful for Shivers.
Yeah, it's hopeful for the whole First Law Trilogy too, that like, hey, you know, Shivers is willing to walk away from this whole thing even after we've seen him go so far off the deep end, and we've seen him come back. Like, we see him fight with his idea of self-worth in the Heroes when he was tired of being treated the way that Black Dow was treating him and all these other things, and the way he was still inquiring about being a better man, and then to see him come all the way out into the Red Country to hunt down Logan again, and then to confront him and realize that he's still alive, and then to walk away and be like, I'll keep it a secret, I don't care. It's like, wow, that's so impactful that like you said, we're back to where he started with in the First Law, choosing not to kill Logan, but it's so much more impactful. The context behind it is different and powerful, even though it's the same thing, because of how far he's come and how big of a significance it is for Shivers to be willing to walk away.
Yeah, all said, Charles.
Man,
and
yeah. So much more we could talk about.
Shivers rides off into the sunset.
Shivers rides
there
off.
is. I mean, but we've been at it for an hour and a half over here.
I think we've reached a good point. The rest of the things are minor compared to what we have discussed, and
right.
Yeah, it's
tweet at us.
Tweet at us. We're always willing to talk more Red Country. Man, Abercrombie is such a unique voice in the world of modern fantasy. I'm just continue to be so impressed.
Yeah.
It's really, really great stuff. So I'm super excited to get into the Age of Madness, right? That's the next trilogy? Or the name?
A Little Hatred. Well, we're going to do Sharp Ends, though, right, Charles? This is actually the time to read Sharp Ends, of the short story book.
We'll have to do it quickly because Wisdom of Crowds drops like September 14th, and we have to read 2 other books before then, and we have so many other books we've promised to read, so it's going to be a close one.
We'll go back to it.
Well, we might be able to.
We'll figure it out.
We'll have to talk about it, but I want to read everything Abercrombie writes because I find it so interesting. When was Sharp Ends, like, do you know on the timeline when it was published?
It was published in between Red Country and A Little Hatred.
Oh, okay. So we're right there on the timeline. We
are going to read it.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. So we can decide. I don't want to lock us in on the air to anything.
Yeah,
but I want to read it at some point.
We will read it at some point.
It's not required reading for moving on to this next series, but it does fill in some interesting gaps.
Yeah, I am interested in it, and I'm sure we'll check it out. But for now, guys, we're gonna have a brief pause on Abercrombie, but not long, because we've got to come back to do the Age of Madness trilogy very soon. This has been part of our year-long read along up to the Wisdom of Crowds, which drops in the middle of September. So I'm looking forward to starting the next trilogy. Dylan, you've been hyping it up. The whole world has pretty much unanimously agreed that this is Abercrombie's best work. So I am beyond pumped and excited to get into it with you.
Yeah, I'm super pumped, Charles. I can't believe I finally had the chance to talk Red Country with you. This has felt like, this is my favorite of the standalones, and it's felt like a one that's been preposterously long in coming. I'll also say, Charles, I'm very impressed. You picked up on everything on your first read, which I think you picked up on a lot more than I did on my first, like Carlette and Eider and all this stuff. I don't know, Charles, you're killing it over there.
I had the benefit of talking about all these books in depth afterwards and researching them and preparing for them and all these other things. So it's not like I came into it as cold as maybe you did back in the day. We've had to do a lot of critical reading and discussion. We've dedicated hours and hours and hours to talking about these characters over and over. So I'm pretty, well versed in Abercrombie going into Red Country. So I'm like, oh, okay, I know all these guys. I mean, we've done character studies on every single POV character in the First Law. So
yeah, no, it's a pleasure, Charles, and to our wonderful First Law fans. So we'll be back talking about all these amazing characters and stories, and we'll do that point of view episode.
Oh yeah.
And, for the run of FTF, Abercrombie is always going to be such a clear staple of our conversation.
For sure.
So, yeah, we're not going anywhere. We're keeping on the Abercrombie hype train.
Spread it out evenly into the indefinite future, much like Logan and Shivers riding off into the sunset. So will all of our Abercrombie discussions as well.
And now I believe it is time for you and me to ride off into the sunset. Charles will, we'll have to pull a Logan and Shivers and temporarily go our separate ways here on this on this Zoom call. But that being said, we will find a way to settle further scores, you and I, Charles, as we continue our way through.
Settling these scores has only made more scores, Dylan, and we've got lots and lots of scores to go. So with that being said, I'm ready to play that sweet, sweet outro music.
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping,
Charles.
All
right, here we go. Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. This has been your co-host, Charles and Dylan. If you like what you heard today, find us over on social media at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end on Twitter and the FTF Podcast on Instagram. Give us a like, send us some messages, let us know what you think. We're always down to chat First Law, so please hit us up there. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further than social media and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Click the Friends Talking Fantasy page. Scroll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click in order to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have a little bit of extra time, then writing review is extremely helpful for a podcast like ours. But that said, just listening is more than enough. We really, really appreciate it. It's good to be back.
It is great to have you back, Dylan. I'm super excited for all the conversations we're going to have in the future. But for now, as always, go forth and conquer, friends.